William sat in his leather chair, staring at the rain streaking down the window of their home. The coffee in his hand had gone cold an hour ago, but he hadn't noticed. His mind was somewhere else, trapped in a moment that happened 3 days ago. A moment when everything changed. They had been together for 12 years. 12 years of building a life, of dreams shared over morning coffee, of quiet evenings on the couch. Kate had been his anchor, the person who understood him when the world felt too heavy. She knew how he liked his eggs, that he needed silence in the mornings, and that he secretly cried during animated movies about dogs. The argument had started small, like most of their disagreements. William had forgotten their anniversary dinner. Not completely forgotten, just missed it because of work. He had texted her around 8 in the evening, realizing with horror that she had been sitting alone at their favorite restaurant for over an hour. The reservation she had made weeks ago, the dress she had bought specially for the occasion. When he finally made it home that night, flowers in hand and apologies ready, Kate was sitting on the couch. The television was off. The house was dark except for one lamp. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She was just sitting there, still wearing that beautiful blue dress, her hands folded in her lap. William had launched into his explanation immediately. Traffic had been terrible. His boss had needed him for an emergency meeting. His phone had died. The excuses tumbled out one after another, each one weaker than the last. Kate had listened without interrupting, her face calm and expressionless. Then she had stood up slowly, smoothing down her dress. William remembered thinking how beautiful she looked even in the dim light. She had walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and turned to face him. That was when she spoke, and her voice did something he had never heard before. It cracked, not from crying, not from shouting. It simply broke in the middle of a sentence, like something inside her had finally given way, after holding on for too long. She had been saying something about how she had waited, how she had made excuses for him to the waiter, how she had sat there watching couples celebrate their own special moments while her phone remained silent. The break in her voice was so subtle that someone else might have missed it. But William knew Kate. He knew every tone, every inflection, every mood. This break was different. It was the sound of someone who had finally used up their last bit of hope. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't thrown anything or slammed doors. She had simply said in that broken voice that she was tired, so very tired. Then she had gone upstairs to bed, leaving William standing in the kitchen with his wilted flowers and hollow excuses. Now, 3 days later, William was beginning to understand what that moment meant. Kate still spoke to him. She still made breakfast. She still asked about his day. But something fundamental had shifted. There was a distance in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a careful politeness that felt worse than any argument they had ever had. He thought back over the past year. How many times had he promised to be home for dinner and arrived after she had already eaten alone? How many weekend plans had he canceled because something came up at work? How many times had Kate smiled and said it was fine, that she understood, that they could reschedule? She had been understanding, patient, supportive. She had built her life around his schedule, his needs, his career, and he had taken it for granted, assuming that her patience was infinite, that her love would always be there waiting no matter how many times he let her down. William set down his cold coffee and picked up his phone. He scrolled through their text messages from the past few months. Her messages were full of little details about her day, questions about his schedule, reminders about family events. His responses were short, distracted. Work had been so demanding lately. There was always another deadline, another crisis, another reason why everything else had to wait. But Kate had waited, and waited, and waited, until something inside her had finally broken. He heard her footsteps on the stairs. Kate appeared in the doorway, dressed for work in her neat blazer and skirt. Her hair was pulled back, her makeup perfect. She looked composed and professional, like she did every morning. But William saw the difference now. The light in her eyes when she looked at him had dimmed. She asked if he wanted more coffee. Her voice was steady now, controlled. William said yes, even though he hadn't touched the first cup. He watched as she moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. They had shared this space for so long that they moved around each other without thinking, each knowing where the other would be. Kate poured the coffee and set it in front of him. She glanced at the clock and mentioned that she had an early meeting. William nodded. He wanted to say something, to bridge the gap that had opened between them, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he say that would matter now? She picked up her bag and keys. At the door, she paused and looked back at him. For a moment, William thought he saw something in her expression, a flicker of the warmth that used to be there. But then it was gone, replaced by that same careful politeness. She told him to have a good day. The door closed softly behind her. William sat alone in the kitchen, the untouched coffee growing cold in front of him. The house felt different now, emptier. He realized that Kate had been the one who made this place feel like home. Her laughter, her music playing while she cooked, her habit of leaving books on every surface, her plants on the windowsills. All the little things that made a house more than just walls and furniture. Those things were still there, but they felt like echoes now. Like memories of something that was slipping away. He thought about the moment her voice had broken, how he had stood there with his flowers, still thinking he could fix everything with the right words, the right gesture, how he hadn't understood that she wasn't asking for flowers or apologies. She was asking for him to see her, to value her, to make her a priority instead of an afterthought. William had always believed that love was about the big moments, the proposals, the anniversaries, the grand gestures, but sitting in the empty kitchen, he began to understand that love was actually about the small moments, the daily choices, the decision to come home on time, the effort to remember what matters to the other person, the consistency of showing up day after day, not just when it was convenient. Kate had been showing up for 12 years. And he had slowly, without even realizing it, stopped showing up for her. The office felt suffocating that day. William tried to focus on the reports spread across his desk, but his mind kept drifting back to Kate. The way she had looked at him that morning, or rather, the way she had looked through him. He had become invisible to her, and the realization was slowly tearing him apart. His colleague Marcus knocked on the doorframe and walked in without waiting for a response. They had worked together for 8 years, climbing the corporate ladder side by side. Marcus dropped into the chair across from William's desk and started talking about the upcoming presentation. William nodded at the appropriate moments, but he wasn't really listening. Marcus stopped mid-sentence and leaned forward. He asked William what was going on, said he looked like he hadn't slept in days. William opened his mouth to give his usual response, to say everything was fine. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself telling Marcus about the anniversary dinner, about Kate's broken voice, about the distance that had grown between them. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he shared his own story. 5 years ago, his marriage had fallen apart, not because of one big betrayal or dramatic fight, but because of 1,000 small neglects. He had been so focused on his career, on climbing higher and earning more, that he had forgotten why he was doing it all in the first place. By the time he noticed, his wife had already emotionally left the marriage. The divorce papers had just been a formality. William felt something cold settle in his stomach. He asked Marcus what he should do. Marcus shook his head and said that there was no simple answer. Some damage could be repaired and some couldn't. The question was whether Kate still had any hope left, or if that broken voice had been her goodbye. After Marcus left, William sat staring at his computer screen. The words blurred together. He thought about calling Kate, but what would he say? Sorry seemed too small. Promise seemed too empty. He had made promises before and broken them. He looked at the framed photo on his desk. It was from their trip to the coast 5 years ago. Kate was laughing, her hair wild from the wind, her eyes bright with joy. William tried to remember the last time he had seen her laugh like that. The last time they had taken a trip together. The last time they had done anything that wasn't just going through the motions of daily life. His phone buzzed with an email from his boss. Another late meeting scheduled for tonight. William stared at the message, his finger hovering over the accept button. This was the pattern. Work needed him, so he said yes. Kate would understand, so he stayed late. The cycle repeated itself until understanding turned into resignation, and resignation into that terrible broken voice. He declined the meeting. His boss called immediately, irritation clear in his voice. There were important clients to meet, deadlines to discuss, strategies to plan. William listened to all of it, feeling the familiar pull of obligation and ambition. Then he said no. Not tonight. He had something more important to handle. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted several seconds. Then his boss said, "Fine, but this better not become a habit." The call ended abruptly. William sat back in his chair, his heart pounding. In 8 years at this company, he had never said no to a meeting, never put anything before work. The decision felt both terrifying and liberating. He left the office at 5, something he hadn't done in months. The evening traffic was heavy, but William didn't mind. He stopped at the flower shop, then kept driving past it. Flowers weren't going to fix this. He needed to do something that showed Kate he was actually listening, that he understood what he had lost. William drove to the bookstore across town, the small independent one Kate loved. She had mentioned wanting a specific book weeks ago, had shown him the cover on her phone while they ate breakfast. He had nodded and immediately forgotten about it. Now he searched the shelves until he found it, along with 2 others by the same author. Next, he stopped at the Italian market where Kate bought fresh pasta. He picked up ingredients for her favorite meal, the one she always made on special occasions, the one he usually ate while distracted by his phone or thinking about work. Tonight would be different. When he arrived home, Kate's car was already in the driveway. William felt nervous walking into his own house. He found her in the living room, curled up on the couch with her laptop. She looked up when he entered, surprise flickering across her face at seeing him home so early. William set down the grocery bags and books. He told her he had declined a meeting, that he had left work on time, that he wanted to make dinner for her tonight. Kate's expression was unreadable. She asked what the occasion was. There was no occasion, William said. That was the problem. He had been waiting for special occasions for the right moments instead of making every day matter. He had treated their relationship like something that would always be there, like furniture he could ignore until he needed it. Kate closed her laptop slowly. She studied his face, searching for something. William stood there, letting her look, hoping she could see that he finally understood. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 12 years of history and 3 days of distance. She asked if he remembered their first anniversary. William nodded. They had been broke back then, both working entry-level jobs and living in a tiny apartment. He had made dinner, burned the chicken, and they had ended up eating cereal and laughing about it. Kate had said it was the best anniversary she could imagine because they were together. Somewhere along the way, William had forgotten that truth. He had started thinking that success meant working longer hours, earning more money, climbing higher. He had convinced himself that he was building a better life for them, but he had been building it without her. Kate stood up and walked to the window. She said that the broken voice, the moment he was thinking about, wasn't just about a missed dinner. It was about all the missed moments that had come before. Every time he had chosen work over her. Every time he had promised to change and didn't. Every time she had swallowed her disappointment and told herself that his career was important too. She turned to face him, and William saw tears in her eyes for the first time since the anniversary dinner. Kate said she had been patient because she loved him, because she believed in the life they were building together. But lately she had started to wonder if he was building that life with her or despite her. If she was his partner or just someone who was there when he finally came home. William wanted to rush forward, to hold her, to promise that everything would change. But he forced himself to stand still and listen. This was what he should have been doing all along. Listening, paying attention, seeing Kate as a person with her own needs and limits, not just as the understanding partner who would always be there. Kate wiped her eyes and said she was scared. Scared that they had drifted too far apart. Scared that he would make promises tonight and break them tomorrow. Scared that she had already started imagining a life without him, and that the thought didn't hurt as much as it should. Those words hit William like a physical blow. The idea of Kate imagining a life without him, of her being prepared for their end, was more painful than anything he had ever experienced. He had been so focused on his own guilt and regret that he hadn't fully grasped how close he was to losing her. William finally moved toward Kate, but stopped a few feet away, giving her space. He told her that she had every right to be scared, that he had given her no reason to trust his promises anymore, that he couldn't stand here and guarantee that everything would be perfect from now on, because life was complicated and he was far from perfect. But he could promise to try. Really try, not in the grand gesture way, but in the daily, unglamorous way that actually mattered. Coming home for dinner, remembering the little things, making her a priority instead of an afterthought, and if he started slipping back into old patterns, he wanted her to call him out immediately, not suffer in silence until her voice broke again. Kate wrapped her arms around herself. She asked how she could believe him this time, how this was different from all the other times he had promised to do better. William had no easy answer. He couldn't point to some magical change that had happened inside him. All he had was the sick feeling in his stomach when he thought about losing her, and the clear memory of her voice breaking. He told her about Marcus, about the story of his failed marriage, about how William had seen his own future in that story and it had terrified him. He was standing at a crossroads, and one path led to becoming someone who looked back with regret, wondering why he had sacrificed the person he loved for a career that would never love him back. Kate listened, her expression still guarded. She said that fear of losing something wasn't the same as actually valuing it. People could be motivated by fear for a little while, but eventually the fear faded and old habits returned. She needed more than his fear. She needed proof that he actually wanted to be present in their relationship. William nodded. She was right. He asked what she needed from him, not in a defensive way, but genuinely wanting to know. Kate seemed surprised by the question. She thought for a moment, then started speaking. She needed him to remember that she had dreams too. She had put her own career advancement on hold twice so he could take promotions that required long hours. She had been supportive because she believed they were a team, but somewhere along the way it had stopped feeling like a team and started feeling like she was his support staff. Kate wanted to go back to school. She'd been thinking about it for 2 years but had never mentioned it, because William was always so stressed about work. She didn't want to add to his burden. She had been making herself smaller and quieter, trying not to need too much, trying not to be one more demand on his time. William felt shame wash over him. He hadn't known she wanted to go back to school, hadn't asked about her goals or dreams in so long. He had been so wrapped up in his own ambitions that he had forgotten Kate had her own. She wasn't just an extension of his life. She was a complete person with her own desires and disappointments. He asked what she wanted to study. Kate's eyes lit up slightly as she talked about getting a degree in art therapy. She had been volunteering at a community center on weekends working with children and had discovered a passion for it. But the advanced positions required a master's degree. It would mean 2 years of classes, some of them in the evening. It would mean William would need to be home more, to share the household responsibilities equally. William said yes immediately. Whatever she needed, whatever it took. Kate shook her head and said it wasn't that simple. Words were easy. Following through was hard. She had watched him promise things before and then gradually slide back into his old patterns. She was tired of being disappointed. The groceries were still sitting on the counter. William asked if he could make dinner while they talked. Kate seemed uncertain, but she followed him into the kitchen. As William started cooking, they fell into an old rhythm. Kate leaned against the counter, watching him work. They had cooked together countless times in the early years of their relationship, when they were poor and happy and full of hope for the future. William asked about the volunteer work at the community center. Kate started talking hesitantly at first, then with more enthusiasm. She told him about the kids she worked with, about the art projects they created, about how powerful it was to watch children express feelings they couldn't put into words. Her face came alive as she spoke, and William realized how long it had been since he had seen her passionate about something. He had been living with a ghost of Kate, someone who had learned to dim her own light so it wouldn't demand attention. The real Kate, vibrant and full of life, had been hiding, waiting to see if it was safe to come out. As the pasta cooked, William told Kate about his day. Not just the surface details, but how he had felt. His conversation with Marcus. The moment he had declined the meeting and felt both terrified and free. The realization that he had been chasing success at work because it was measurable and clear, while success in their relationship required something much harder, constant attention and effort. Kate was quiet, processing his words. She said that she appreciated his honesty, but she needed him to understand something. This couldn't be a temporary change motivated by fear of losing her. If he changed just to keep her, then went back to old patterns once he felt secure again, it would break her completely. The next time her voice broke, there would be no coming back from it. William stopped stirring the sauce and turned to face her fully. He said he understood. He also understood that she had no reason to take his word for it. So he proposed something different. They would go to counseling together. Not because their relationship was broken beyond repair, but because he wanted to learn how to be better. He wanted to understand why he had made the choices he had made and how to make different ones. Kate looked surprised. William had always resisted the idea of therapy, seeing it as an admission of failure. But standing in their kitchen, watching the careful distance in Kate's eyes, he realized that real failure was being too proud to ask for help. She asked if he really meant it. William pulled out his phone and right there in front of her, searched for couples therapists in their area. He found one with good reviews and availability. He asked Kate to pick a day that worked for her schedule, not his. She chose Thursday evening. William booked the appointment immediately and showed her the confirmation. It was a small step, but Kate's expression softened slightly. She said Thursday worked for her. William felt a tiny bit of hope flicker to life. They ate dinner together that night, really together without phones or distractions. The pasta was good. The conversation was careful but real. After dinner, Kate went upstairs. William cleaned the kitchen, taking his time, thinking about everything she had said. When he finished, he found Kate in their bedroom, reading one of the books he had bought her. She looked up when he entered, and something in her expression had shifted. Not back to how it was before, but not quite as distant either. William asked if he could sit with her. Kate nodded. They sat on the bed, not quite touching, the book between them like a bridge. Kate showed him a passage she had just read, something about the bravery required to start over. They talked about the book, about the characters, about nothing in particular and everything at once. It wasn't fixed. They weren't magically back to being the couple they had been 12 years ago, young and in love and unaware of how hard life could be. But they were talking, really talking, and William was listening, really listening. Thursday arrived with the weight of expectation. William had kept his word all week, coming home on time, asking about Kate's day, actually listening to the answers. But both of them knew these few days didn't erase 12 years of patterns. The therapy session felt like a test, one that William desperately wanted to pass. They drove to the therapist's office in separate cars, meeting in the parking lot. William had suggested they drive together, but Kate said she wanted her own way home just in case. Just in case of what, she didn't say. But William understood. She was protecting herself, keeping an exit route open. The therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, had kind eyes and a calm presence. Her office was comfortable, with soft lighting and tissues placed strategically on every surface. She started by asking them each to describe why they were there. William began, but Dr. Chen gently stopped him and asked Kate to go first. Kate spoke carefully, measuring her words. She talked about feeling invisible, about how she had spent years being understanding and accommodating, waiting for things to get better. Until one day she realized she had been waiting for someone who wasn't coming. She described the anniversary dinner, her voice steady this time, controlled. She said the worst part wasn't that William had missed it, but that she hadn't been surprised. Dr. Chen asked what Kate meant by that. Kate explained that she had made the reservation, bought the dress, and gotten ready with a small voice in the back of her mind, already preparing her for disappointment. She had hoped William would show up, but she hadn't expected it. And that realization, sitting alone in the restaurant, had broken something inside her. She had trained herself not to expect anything from her own husband. William listened, his chest tight. Hearing Kate describe it in this sterile clinical setting made it real in a way it hadn't been before. He had damaged her trust so thoroughly that she protected herself from him, like he was a source of inevitable pain. When it was William's turn, he tried to explain about work pressure and career ambitions. Dr. Chen listened patiently, then asked a simple question. What was he afraid would happen if he wasn't constantly available for work? William opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. He realized he didn't have a good answer. Dr. Chen waited, comfortable with the silence. William thought about it. Was he afraid of being fired? Not really. He was good at his job and the company needed him. Was he afraid of not advancing? Maybe, but why? What was he trying to prove, and to whom? The answer, when it came, surprised him. He was afraid of being ordinary. William had grown up watching his father work himself into exhaustion at a job he hated, coming home tired and defeated every night. William had sworn he would be different. He would be successful. He would matter. He would make a mark on the world. But in running away from his father's life of quiet desperation, William had recreated it in a different form. He was exhausted. He was disconnected from the person he loved. He was so busy trying to be extraordinary at work that he had become absent from his own life. Dr. Chen asked him what success meant to him. William struggled to answer. He talked about promotions and recognition and financial security. Dr. Chen nodded, then asked if he felt successful. William said yes, then no, then admitted he didn't know anymore. How could he be successful if he was losing Kate? Kate shifted in her seat. She said something that cut through all of William's explanations. She said he had been using work as an escape. When things got difficult or emotional at home, he disappeared into work where problems had clear solutions and success was measurable. Their relationship required vulnerability and presence, things that were much harder than closing another business deal. William wanted to argue, but he couldn't. She was right. Work was easier than the messy, complicated work of maintaining a relationship. At the office, he knew the rules. He knew how to succeed. At home, with Kate, he had to be emotionally available, present, willing to fail and try again. It was terrifying. Dr. Chen gave them homework. She asked William to identify 3 specific ways his work habits impacted Kate, and 3 specific changes he could make. She asked Kate to identify what she needed to feel valued in the relationship, not in vague terms, but specific, concrete actions. The drive home felt long, even though they were in separate cars. William kept glancing in his rearview mirror, watching Kate's headlights behind him. He was afraid she might turn off at some point, head somewhere else, decide this was all too hard. But she followed him home. They pulled into the driveway one after the other. Inside, Kate made tea while William stood awkwardly in the kitchen. The session had stripped away their polite distance, leaving raw honesty in its place. It was uncomfortable, but it was real. Kate asked what he had thought of the session. William admitted it had been harder than he expected. Having to examine his own motivations and fears, to admit that he had been running away from their relationship, had been painful. But necessary, Kate nodded. She said it had been hard for her too, putting into words how much hurt she had been carrying. She had spent so long telling herself that she was fine, that she could handle William's absence, that saying it out loud had felt like betrayal. But it was also a relief. They sat at the kitchen table, tea growing cold between them. William pulled out his phone and opened the Notes app. He wanted to do the homework now, together. Kate looked skeptical but didn't stop him. William started listing the ways his work habits impacted Kate. First, she ate dinner alone most nights, a daily reminder that she wasn't his priority. Second, they never made plans together anymore because Kate couldn't count on him being available. Third, Kate had stopped sharing good news or struggles with him because he was always distracted or stressed about work. Kate listened, her expression unreadable. She added a fourth. His constant work stress affected the entire atmosphere of their home. Even when he was physically present, he brought the tension with him. She had started feeling anxious in her own house, walking on eggshells, trying not to add to his burden. William felt sick. He had thought he was protecting Kate by not complaining, by handling work stress on his own. Instead, he had poisoned their home with unspoken tension. She had been living in a house with an emotional ghost, never knowing what mood he would bring through the door. For the changes, William wrote down coming home by 6 every evening, unless there was a genuine emergency, putting his phone away during dinner and evening hours, and taking 1 full day every weekend where work was completely off limits, no emails, no calls, no thinking about projects. Kate studied the list. She said it was a good start, but she wanted to add one more thing. She wanted him to tell her when work was stressful, to share what was happening instead of bottling it up. She was his partner, not a fragile thing that needed to be protected from reality. She wanted the chance to support him, but she couldn't do that if he shut her out. William agreed. Then he asked Kate for her list. What did she need from him? Kate pulled out her own phone. She had already started writing during the drive home. She needed him to ask about her day and actually listen to the answer. She needed him to remember important things, not just anniversaries, but the small stuff. Her dentist appointments, her presentation at work, her plans with friends. She needed him to acknowledge that her time was as valuable as his. When she was busy, it mattered just as much as when he was busy. and she needed him to support her going back to school, not just in words but in actions, taking on more household responsibilities, being flexible with his schedule, celebrating her achievements the way she had always celebrated his. William wrote it all down. Then he did something that surprised both of them. He pulled out his work calendar and started blocking off time. 6 to 9 every evening marked as unavailable. Saturdays, completely blocked. He added reminders for things Kate had mentioned. Her friend's birthday next month, the deadline for school applications, her favorite show premiering next week. Kate watched him, tears forming in her eyes. She asked if he really thought he could stick to this, if his boss would accept these boundaries, if he was truly ready to choose their relationship over his career ambitions. William looked at Kate, really looked at her, and saw the hope and fear warring in her eyes. He said he didn't know if his boss would accept it. He didn't know if this would hurt his career. But he did know that losing Kate would hurt more than any professional setback ever could. He was done choosing work over her, done making her wait, done taking her for granted. Kate reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time she had voluntarily touched him since the anniversary dinner. Her hand was warm in his, and William felt something ease in his chest. This wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a door opening, just slightly. The next few weeks tested William's commitment in ways he hadn't anticipated. His boss was not happy about the new boundaries. There were pointed comments about dedication and team players. A project William had been leading was reassigned to someone with more flexible hours. William felt the sting of professional disappointment, the fear that he was sacrificing everything he had worked for. But then he would come home at 6 and find Kate making dinner, and she would smile at him. A real smile, not the polite mask she had been wearing. They would cook together, talking about their days, and William would remember why he was making these choices. Kate started researching graduate programs. She spread brochures and catalogs across the dining table, her eyes bright with excitement. William sat with her, asking questions, helping her compare programs. He realized he had never seen her like this, so animated and full of purpose. He had been living with a dimmed version of Kate for so long that he had forgotten how vibrant she could be. One evening, Kate received an acceptance letter from her top choice program. She opened it with shaking hands, read it twice, then let out a scream of joy. William picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. In that moment, they felt like the couple they had been at the beginning, young and full of possibility. But the good moments were interrupted by hard ones. 3 weeks into William's new schedule, a major client threatened to leave if William wasn't available for evening calls. His boss gave him an ultimatum. Either he made himself available or they would find someone who would. William came home that night stressed and conflicted. Kate found him sitting in the dark living room, staring at nothing. She sat beside him and asked what was wrong. William explained the situation. The client, the ultimatum, the pressure to choose. Kate was quiet for a long time. Then she said something unexpected. She told him she didn't want him to sacrifice his career for her. That wasn't what this was about. She wanted a partner who could find balance, who valued both work and relationship, who could set healthy boundaries without feeling like he was betraying his ambitions. She said if he went back to his old patterns, choosing work every time, they would end up right back where they started. But if he simply caved to every demand at home, resenting the sacrifices, that wouldn't work either. They needed to figure this out together. They talked for hours that night. William admitted he was scared. Scared of losing his professional identity, of being seen as someone who wasn't committed. Kate understood, but she pointed out that he had been so committed to work that he had nearly destroyed his commitment to her. There had to be a middle ground. Together, they came up with a solution. William would talk to his boss and the client, explaining that he was available during specific evening hours twice a week, but the rest of his time was blocked. If that wasn't acceptable to the client, then perhaps they weren't the right fit for the company long term. It was a compromise, but one with clear boundaries. The next day, William had the conversation. It was one of the hardest professional discussions he had ever had. His boss was frustrated. The client was initially resistant, but William stood firm. He explained that he was committed to excellent work during work hours, but he also had personal commitments that mattered. Surprisingly, the client respected the boundary. They agreed to the 2 evening calls per week. William's boss was less pleased, but he accepted it. William knew this might impact his future promotions, his standing in the company. But he also knew that the old path had been leading somewhere he didn't want to go. Kate was proud of him. She said so clearly, and William felt something shift inside him. Her pride meant more than any professional recognition ever had. He had spent years chasing validation at work while ignoring the person whose opinion actually mattered most. They continued therapy sessions every other week. Dr. Chen helped them navigate the difficult terrain of rebuilding trust. She taught them how to communicate more effectively, how to address problems before they festered, how to appreciate the daily effort relationships required. One session, Dr. Chen asked them both to describe a recent moment when they felt connected. Kate talked about a morning when William had woken up early to make her favorite breakfast before a big presentation. Not because it was a special occasion, but just because he wanted to support her. William described an evening when Kate had noticed he was stressed and had suggested they take a walk together. They had walked for an hour, not solving anything, just being present with each other. It had been exactly what he needed, even though he hadn't known it. Dr. Chen pointed out that both moments were small, everyday gestures. That was what relationships were built on, not grand romantic gestures, but consistent, thoughtful presence. William and Kate had lost that somewhere along the way, but they were finding it again. Kate's graduate program started in the fall. William took a half-day off work to help her move her things into the student building, to walk around campus with her, to share in her excitement. As they stood outside her first classroom, Kate turned to him with tears in her eyes. She said she had imagined this moment so many times, always alone. She had convinced herself that William would be too busy, that she would navigate this new chapter by herself. But here he was, present and engaged, genuinely happy for her. It meant everything. William held her close and apologized again for all the times he hadn't been there. Kate stopped him. She said they needed to stop living in the past. Yes, he had made mistakes. Yes, she had been hurt. But they were both choosing to move forward, and that meant letting go of constant apologies and guilt. They were building something new. Not trying to recreate what they had lost, but creating something different. Something stronger because it was built on hard-won understanding rather than naive hope. The semester began, and their lives found a new rhythm. Kate had evening classes twice a week. William made sure to have dinner ready when she got home, to ask about her studies, to quiz her before exams. He attended a family art show where Kate's students displayed their work, and he saw the impact she was having on these children's lives. Kate, in turn, made space for William's work commitments. When he had a genuinely important deadline, she understood. The difference was that these moments were now exceptions rather than the rule, and William made sure to communicate clearly, to express gratitude for her understanding, to make up for missed time. They weren't perfect. They still had disagreements. There were still moments of frustration and misunderstanding, but they had learned how to navigate these moments without letting them fester. They talked more. They listened better. They showed up for each other consistently. 6 months after that broken voice on their anniversary night, William and Kate found themselves back at the same restaurant. This time, William had made the reservation himself. He had blocked the entire evening on his calendar. He had turned off his phone and left it in the car. Kate wore a different dress, but her smile was the same one from 12 years ago. Nervous, hopeful, real. They sat across from each other, and William reached for her hand. She let him take it, her fingers intertwining with his. William told her he had been thinking about that night 6 months ago. How her voice had broken and something inside him had broken too. How he had finally understood what he was losing. Kate listened, her eyes soft in the candlelight. She said that night had been her breaking point, but it had also been her wake-up call. She had realized she had been complicit in the problems between them. She had made herself small, had stopped asking for what she needed, had accepted less than she deserved. His absence had hurt her, but her own silence had enabled it. William disagreed gently. He said the responsibility was his. He had been the one who had made work his priority, who had taken her for granted. Kate shook her head. She said relationships were complicated. They had both made mistakes. They had both had to change. The waiter brought their food, and they ate slowly, savoring the meal and the conversation. They talked about Kate's classes. about a project William was excited about at work, about their plans for the summer. Normal, everyday topics that felt precious because they were sharing them. After dinner, they walked along the waterfront. The city lights reflected on the water, and the evening was cool and clear. William stopped at a bench and pulled Kate down beside him. He said he had something to give her. Kate looked curious and slightly nervous. William pulled out a small box, and Kate's eyes widened. But when she opened it, it wasn't a ring. It was a key. Kate looked at it, confused, then looked at William for explanation. William explained that he had been thinking about grand gestures and what actually mattered. He didn't need to propose again. They were already married, already committed. But he wanted to give her something that symbolized the change between them. The key was to a small art studio he had rented for her. A space where she could work on her art therapy projects, where she could create without worrying about making a mess in their home. A space that was entirely hers, because he understood now that she needed to be more than just his wife. She needed to be her own person with her own dreams. Kate stared at the key, tears streaming down her face. She asked when he had done this. William admitted he had been planning it for weeks, working with her professors to understand what kind of space would be most useful. He had wanted to get it right. Kate threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at the same time. She said it was perfect, more than perfect, because it showed that he saw her, really saw her, not just as someone who supported his life, but as someone with her own goals and needs. They sat on that bench for a long time, holding each other, watching the water. Kate said something that had been on her mind. She said she forgave him, not just for the missed anniversary, but for all the accumulated hurts and disappointments. She forgave him, and more importantly, she forgave herself for staying silent for so long. William felt something release in his chest, a tension he had been carrying for months. He said he couldn't promise to be perfect. He would still make mistakes, still get distracted sometimes, still struggle with work-life balance. But he could promise to keep trying, to keep showing up, to keep choosing her. Kate said that was all she needed. Not perfection, but effort. Not grand gestures, but consistent presence. Not promises about the future, but action in the present. They walked back to the car, hand in hand. On the drive home, Kate asked William if he ever regretted the professional opportunities he had given up, the promotions he might have missed because of his new boundaries. William thought about it honestly. He said yes, sometimes he wondered what might have been. But then he thought about the alternative. He thought about Marcus, divorced and lonely, with all his professional success and no one to share it with. He thought about coming home to an empty house because Kate had finally given up and left. He thought about that broken voice and knew he never wanted to hear it again. The professional regrets were small and fleeting. The thought of losing Kate was huge and permanent. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. When they got home, Kate showed William the sketchbook she had been keeping. It was filled with drawings of them, of their journey over the past 6 months. There were dark, heavy sketches from the early days when everything felt uncertain. Then gradually, lighter images, touches of color, moments of connection. William was amazed by her talent, by the emotion captured in each drawing. Kate said art had helped her process everything, had given her a way to express feelings she couldn't put into words. She wanted to use that power to help others, especially children who struggled to communicate their feelings. William asked if he could keep one of the drawings. Kate flipped through the book and found one from a few weeks earlier. It showed 2 people sitting at a kitchen table, their hands almost touching across the space between them. She said it captured where they had been, still distant but reaching toward each other. William hung it in his office the next day. When colleagues asked about it, he simply said it was by his wife. Some of them didn't even know he was married. He had kept his personal life so separate from work that his co-workers knew almost nothing about Kate, about their struggles, about what mattered to him beyond quarterly results. He started changing that too, mentioning Kate in conversations, showing pictures from her art show, leaving at 6 even when others stayed late. Some colleagues judged him for it. Others seemed quietly envious. A few younger employees started setting their own boundaries, inspired by William's example. Marcus pulled him aside one day and said he could see the change in William. Asked if things were better at home. William said they were. Not easy, not perfect, but better. Real. Marcus looked sad for a moment, then said he was glad William had figured it out before it was too late. William realized that his story could have gone so differently. If Kate's voice hadn't broken that night, if the crack in her composure hadn't finally shown him what he was doing, they might have drifted further apart until there was nothing left to save. The broken voice had been a gift, a wake-up call, a last chance. A year after the anniversary dinner, William came home to find Kate in the kitchen, music playing, her moving to the rhythm as she chopped vegetables. She was wearing paint-stained jeans and one of his old shirts. Her hair was messy. She looked absolutely beautiful. She turned when she heard him and her whole face lit up, not the careful, guarded expression she had worn for those terrible few weeks, but genuine joy at seeing him. William set down his briefcase and went to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, swaying to the music. Kate leaned back against him and said she had good news. One of her professors wanted to feature her work in an upcoming exhibition. It was a big opportunity, a chance to get her name out there in the art therapy community. William spun her around and congratulated her, genuinely thrilled. They danced in the kitchen, celebrating her success, and William thought about how close he had come to missing this. If he had continued on his old path, he wouldn't have been here for this moment. He would have been at the office, checking emails, missing out on the real moments that made life worth living. Kate pulled back and looked at him seriously. She said she wanted to tell him something important. William braced himself, old fears rising, but Kate was smiling. She said she was happy, truly deeply happy, not in spite of the hard times they had been through, but because of them. They had almost lost each other, but instead they had found a better version of their relationship. William agreed. They had been forced to examine everything, to break down what wasn't working and rebuild it stronger. It had been painful, but it had also been necessary. He was grateful for that broken voice, for the crisis that had forced them to change. They finished making dinner together, talking and laughing, comfortable in each other's presence in a way they hadn't been in years. After they ate, Kate worked on homework while William read beside her, their feet touching on the couch. It was ordinary. It was perfect. Later that night, as they got ready for bed, Kate said something that stuck with William. She said that relationships weren't about finding the perfect person or having the perfect love story. They were about two imperfect people choosing each other, every day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. William thought about all the days he had failed to choose Kate, all the times he had chosen work or comfort or ambition instead. But he was choosing her now. Every day, in big ways and small ways, he was choosing her. And she was choosing him back. They had almost reached the end of their story. That broken voice could have been the beginning of their ending. Instead, it had been the beginning of something new. A second chance. A better chapter. William turned off the light and pulled Kate close. She settled against him with a contented sigh. He said he loved her. Kate said she loved him too. In the darkness, William smiled. They were going to be okay. Better than okay. They were going to be happy, and this time,